Today I'll be telling you about the process of photogrammetry. So this is a pipe that I 3D modeled recently, um, and it's from Botswana. It's made out of wood. So it was quite tricky to model because it's very dark. It's a dark wood. It's not quite a light wood. So I needed to ensure that there was enough light focused on the object and that my camera settings were right in order to get enough detail from the object that the program we feed these photos into recognize. So with photogrammetry, you photograph basically 5 angles. So your lowermost angle, your middle angle, your top angle, and then the very top of the object and the bottom of the object. So when we 3D model objects in the department, we ensure that they are first stable enough to sort of stand by themselves. This one isn't very stable, so what I had to do was put some sand under the backdrop and place the object on top of it so that it could support itself. Because the objects we work with are quite old, and we want to ensure that they are secure and they don't fall off tables or fall off while we're photographing them. So when I modeled this object, I had to ensure that every time I rotated the object to take a new series of photographs, I had to then move the sand underneath and make sure it was stable and start the process all over again. So with photogrammetry, you rotate the object in 15-degree increments and take a series of photographs of all your angles along those increments until you get sort of back to your starting point with the objects. So you want to ensure that you cover almost all of the object while you're taking photos so that the program recognizes what 3D model you're trying to make. There's only so much of data that the program itself can glean from the photos that you feed into it. So for example, if I had to only take photos of the bottom of the object and then the top of the object, the program would be completely confused. It wouldn't know what I'm trying to model. It would probably give me something quite alien-like, which I've had before. I've had objects with 2 heads, 8 legs, 2 tails. So it's quite tricky sometimes because you think that you're doing everything right, but then when you feed photos into the actual program, it spits out in something entirely different, and you have to sort of evaluate what you do differently this time, whether you need more light, what angles you need to work on better, where you need better photographs, so that the program can recognize what 3D model you're trying to create. So when we're happy with all of the photos we've taken, we feed it into a program called Metashape. And Metashape is what creates the 3D model for us. So this is called a point cloud. And this is basically collected data from all of the photographs that we have fed into the program. So this is what it creates. All of these are tiny data points that you zoom into, you can see. And if we're happy with this model, obviously the string didn't get modeled. The string is actually really difficult to model, and I'm still working on that. But if we're happy with how the model looks overall, and it's representative of the actual object, we can then move on to the next stage, which is the mesh stage. So the mesh will create something that looks like this, which is a more realistic representation of what the actual object looks like. And you can see that it has meshed everything quite well. If we're happy with the mesh, we can then move on to the texture stage. And the texture is what is going to make the 3D model look sharper and give it more detail. So this is the texture, and you can immediately see the difference between the two. So this is the mesh, texture, mesh, and the texture. So the texture, you can see the actual wood grain, the markings. Texture is pretty amazing. It adds a lot more detail than the mesh does. You can see the object number quite clearly on the bottom, and this is quite a good model. If you need to see where you need to maybe add more photos, which part of the object you need that needs more reinforcement, so new photos, you can go to your mesh and you can actually view the model confidence. So blue is what we aim for in general. Red is not good. Red needs a lot more work. Green is okay. I mean, it could use more reinforcement, but if you're happy with how it actually looks, you don't need to really reinforce any of the green areas. But blue is what we aim for in general. So getting a completely blue model is what we want, which of course then gives us a very good, clean, textured, very detailed, realistic model. And we can then send this model to any researcher who requests it, like if the researcher is from overseas and they can't necessarily make the trip to South Africa, we can send them this model and they can have a look at the actual object without physically having to come here to look at it. So 3D modeling is really useful, and we try and create 3D models as often as we can here in the department. This is very specific though. This I did for a specific project, the Metsemegologolo project, which I've been working on for about 1.5 years now. So this is for that project. But yes, 3D modeling in general is quite useful for the work that we do.